These are Horrid Henry's darkest episodes, starting with episode 29 of season 1. In this episode, we find a chilling moment during Peter's birthday where a clown comes around to perform magic tricks. During his performance, Henry gets bored and disrupts the clown, going as far as to thwart his vanishing trick. Henry's naughtiness makes him expose the clown's trick, and everyone, especially his mom, is frustrated with him, replying to his call for cake with a stern answer.
Until the show is over.
Things go from bad to worse when the clown decides to join in on the action and make Henry his new assistant for the magic trick, and his special role is to become the next item to disappear. Everyone is terrified about this except one person, Henry's mom, who excitedly replies,
Bravo! Bravo! Oh, lovely.
Everyone present is horrified by her behavior, unable to understand the darker meaning of her reaction towards an actual offer to make her son disappear right before her. In Horrid Henry Season 3, Episode 3, titled Rockstar, we find an interaction that reveals a darker undertone between Henry and his mother. With rock music blaring loudly from Henry's radio player, we find him in his own world, where he is the main character in the form of his alter ego, a rock star. Even his pet hamster doesn't miss out on the fun, but just as everything seemed like a never-ending fun for Henry, it all came crashing down as soon as his mom came in. She turned off his loud music and immediately reminded him of his homework, like any dutiful mother would. Henry replied like the naughty child that he is.
I'm doing homework. Rockstar's homework.
His reply about doing Rockstar's homework doesn't seem to impress his mom, as she clearly doesn't buy the idea of Henry being a rock star in any foreseeable future. She makes this clear in a reply against Henry's next protest against homework.
Henry, you are not a rock star, and you never will be.
She continues to hammer down the fact that Henry has no chance in the world to ever achieve his dreams. Quite the dark thing for a mother to say to a child. No wonder he is Horrid Henry. She tries to leave after warning Henry not to drum, but he disobeys as usual and she is furious, but Henry doesn't care. And the next thing she does is declare him grounded. Henry reminds her that he has his rock band practice, but she insists that poor Henry would have to be left out of the group practice.
Well, they're going to have to practice without you.
Henry tries to make her understand just how unfair the whole arrangement is, but Mum could care less, leaving Henry screaming in despair. It must be said to know your mum has zero care about your passion and dreams. That's the case of poor Henry. Looking back at a childhood memory between Henry and Peter in episode 45 of season 1 titled Trapped, we witness a moment that could leave a dark scar on any child. Henry is seen playing happily with his toys, and immediately he notices a nasty stray dog moving aggressively close towards little Peter, who is scared out of his wits. But Henry bravely charges towards the dog, making sure he scares him away from his little brother. With perseverance, the dog finally makes a run for it, and Peter begins to cry in relief. Just then, Henry's mom shows up out of nowhere, and the first thing she does is blame poor Henry.
Horrid Henry. Look, you've made Peter cry again.
Henry's too sad to even defend himself, but just looks on in disbelief. It takes little Peter putting words together that finally gets Mum to notice the stray dog, just a distance away from her boys.
No, Mommy. Look, bad doggy.
Mum only expresses shock at her realization, but doesn't show any form of remorse for the immediate judgment she had passed on poor Henry a second ago. Now, take a look at this moment in Season 3, Episode 7, where Henry was told he couldn't be believed. Henry's making a report of an issue on his own side and asking why he shouldn't be believed. But Mum is making it very clear that she has no reason to believe him. Henry protests that the only reason he is to be believed is because he is telling the truth.
Proof! I don't believe you, Henry.
Mum is very clear on the fact that Henry's truthful words lack the necessary weight to make him believable. Henry's frustration increases as a delivery guy appears to be leaving with a package he really wants. But Mum's refusal to believe him seems to act as a blockade to what he wants.
Even Baldy Brain's getting a parcel delivered, and mine's still not here.
Henry's look of disbelief is akin to that of a child who feels the pain of being called a complete and utter liar. In Perfect Peter's Horrid Day, Peter decides to splash water all over Henry in an attempt to become even more horrible than Henry. Dad comes around to find Henry all wet, and Peter standing directly opposite him with a leaking hose. But the first thing he does is blame Henry as usual.
Henry!
Henry immediately protests in shock, making sure Dad knows it's all Peter's fault. But before Henry could get his words out, Dad defends Peter, calling Henry a liar. This time, Peter made the move to expose himself, claiming full ownership of the horrid deed.
It's true. I sprayed him.
But despite Peter taking the blame for his actions, Dad somehow still makes it all Henry's fault.
Well, Henry, you should have got out of the way when Peter was watering the flowers.
We witness Henry in one of the rare moments where he voices his disdain for the crooked family dynamics he has to deal with.
It's the big idea.
Peter makes it clear to Henry that he isn't the only one who has what it takes to be horrid, but naughty Henry immediately laughs at him, telling him he hasn't even begun to be horrid, leaving Henry frustrated. Just then, Mum shows up and, as usual, blames Henry without even finding out what had happened between them.
Henry, you're filthy.
He is told to go out of sight so Great Aunt Greta doesn't have to see him in his current mess. Henry tries to defend himself, but he is told to shut up and go take a bath. Peter, on the other hand, is lauded by Dad and warmly told to empty a slug out the back. While on his way, Peter, speaking to himself, can't understand why he just can't do something that would make his parents treat him like they treat Henry.
I have to do to get into trouble.
Little Peter can't understand that he is the lovable prince of the family. Just then, Mum shows up and hands Peter a box of chocolate to be kept on the table by Aunt Greta. Peter, at first, struggles with the thought for a second and decides to do the horrid thing, which is to add the slug to the box of chocolate and eat from it, happily telling himself that he has finally achieved horridity.
Now, I'm truly horrid.
The relationship between Peter and Henry is flawed in so many ways, but the most has to do with how they treat each other. In Horrid Henry's Secret Club, we witness Henry punishing Peter by tying him to a tree in medieval style. Just then, Mum comes along and voices her frustration at Henry.
Why do you have to be so horrid, Henry?
Despite her obvious displeasure, we see that Henry doesn't seem to have any remorse for his action. While untying Peter, Mum turns around to find out just why the boys can't get along.
Why can't you play nicely with Peter?
But before she could finish, she and Peter get drenched in water by Moody Margaret and her sidekick, who were actually aiming for Henry. This obviously pisses her off, and she immediately sentences Henry to a more severe punishment, refusing to listen to Henry's pleas that he didn't start the fight.
I don't care who started it. Play nicely or else.
Mum's refusal to listen to him shows Henry in a very bad mood. In his view, it's just not fair to be forced to act good for once in his life. Moody Margaret finds Henry in a corner, moping around, and attempts to get his attention with nuts. But Henry refuses to budge until she shows up to ask him what exactly is going on. Henry replies that he has been given an ultimatum by his mom. Either he acts good, or he loses his fort.
I'm not good. I'm gonna get rid of my fort.
Even Margaret feels extremely sad for Henry and expresses her disgust at the idea of Henry losing his fort to his mom's vegetable garden. But immediately we realize that Margaret is overjoyed by the idea that her arch rival is losing his gang's fort to a vegetable garden, and immediately she and her sidekick begin laughing at poor Henry, whose only incentive to being a good kid is having to be blackmailed by his mum. In Horrid Henry's holiday trip, we witness Henry go completely haywire and display some of his deepest, darkest instincts, which accurately makes him horrid. During his school's trip to the museum, Henry's class comes face to face with the biology section of the museum, and everyone is disgusted by the worms in particular, especially Moody Margaret.
We can eat them like they do on telly.
Oh, yuck.
In a shocking move, Henry does the most horrid thing imaginable. With his bare hands, he yanks out a pile of worms and throws them all over his classmates, causing all the kids to cry out in complete hysteria, leaving the teachers and museum guides frustrated and confused. Everyone is busy picking up the worms while making sure they don't step on the valued museum item as instructed by the big fat lady.
You did not tread on the worms.
One of the kids boldly refuses to touch the worms. We can hardly call him bold, though, as he is scared out of his wits of catching something.
I'm not touching them. Mama might catch something.
Henry, on the other hand, looks like he is enjoying himself. Miss Battleaxe tries to encourage everyone to pick up the worms, but even she gets scared when she tries to pick up the worms herself. Meanwhile, naughty Henry immediately takes the opportunity to fake a need to go to the loo. And in haste, Miss Battleaxe excuses him, but warns him not to take too long. A warning we all know would go unheeded, as Henry is bent on causing mischief as usual. The museum lady makes her suspicion of a culprit aware to everyone, and Henry only gives her a mischievous smile because he knows he is entirely responsible for the mayhem. In Horrid Henry's workday, we discover just how much both Henry's parents dread spending time with him alone. The episode explores just how horrid Mum and Dad think Henry is, making you wonder if they are actual parents. It begins with Mum yelling at Dad, reminding him that it was his turn to take Henry to work on workday at the office because she did it last time.
Did it last year?
Dad wants to make sure she's sure, as anything to keep him from taking Henry to work would be a blessing at that moment. She emphasizes the fact that she would never forget such an experience. The two argue while Peter and Henry look on, confused at the whole drama. It didn't take long for Henry to go all mischievous. He immediately tells Peter that their parents are arguing because neither of them wants to take perfect Peter to work.
Neither of them want to take a worm like you.
Peter, on hearing this, immediately cries out to Mum to confirm this. Henry gets exposed and angrily scolded by Mum for his lies.
Don't be horrid, Henry.
She hands Henry a tray of glasses and sends him to the kitchen while Dad goes over to comfort Peter lovingly. Finally, we get a glimpse into Henry's possible future. In this episode, where Horrid Henry gets married. In this episode, we get to witness how Henry's troubled childhood would play a role in his adult life, and ultimately cause him to not be able to keep a marriage due to his tragic upbringing. Henry wakes up and is extremely shocked to find out that he is not only a 27-year-old adult, but is soon going to wed his childhood nemesis, Moody Margaret of all people. His frustration knows no bounds when it looks like Margaret is all in on the plan. Although not quite eager on getting wedded all of a sudden, but she doesn't seem to be against the whole idea. In fact, she breaks the news to him like it's something he should have known was going to happen all along.
The house we're going to live in when we're married. Married?
Like some twisted, weird plan crafted and hidden away to manifest in a distant future. What's worse is that Margaret, after all these years, didn't lose her sidekick. She is still very close by, repeating every word she hears Margaret make, including the one about the baby that shocks Henry out of his wits.
You've got a baby?
Henry at first thinks the baby belongs to him and Margaret, but she later confirms that it's for Linda, and she is only looking after the child because Linda is busy trying on her bridesmaid dress for the wedding. Just when things look like they couldn't get any worse, Margaret reminds Henry that he is the one doing the cooking around.
Forgotten your cooking, have you?
And even worse, Margaret and her sidekick Susan have a list of chores that Henry has to attend to, leaving Henry wondering how his once blissful young life became a horrible nightmare in adulthood. The whole thing seems like a very dark story told against Henry, a complete and utter nightmare of what he would envision his life to be like in the future. No rock star, no killer boy rats, just an unhappy married life to his arch-enemy, Moody Margaret. Henry's marriage to Moody Margaret showcases the detrimental effects of neglect on a marital relationship. Although their union is unconventional and short-lived, it illustrates the consequences of neglecting each other's needs, feelings, and boundaries. In Henry's own case, the fact that he grew up not being catered to appropriately, and also learning how not to take people's feelings into consideration, clearly manifested in his own marriage. Henry's neglect of Margaret's feelings and needs leads to resentment and frustration. He prioritizes his own desires and hobbies over their relationship, leaving Margaret feeling unappreciated and ignored. Similarly, Margaret's neglect of Henry's playful nature and need for adventure causes him to feel stifled and unhappy. As the neglect continues, their relationship deteriorates and they start to drive each other crazy. They begin to argue and bicker, and their marriage becomes unbearable. Ultimately, they realize that they are better off as friends and rivals rather than husband and wife. At first glance, the Horrid Henry series appears to be a lighthearted and humorous animated show. However, upon closer inspection, it reveals a darker side. The series explores themes of narcissism, entitlement, and the consequences of unchecked behavior. Henry's relentless pursuit of his own desires, regardless of the cost to others, raises questions about the dangers of self-centeredness and a childhood riddled by favoritism and partiality. Additionally, the show's portrayal of Henry's dysfunctional family dynamics and his struggles with authority figures hints at deeper psychological issues. The series' use of satire and absurdity serves as a commentary on the flaws of modern society, making Horrid Henry a more complex and thought-provoking show than initially meets the eye.